My name is Pamela Still, and today, July 30th, 2015, I am interviewing Bob Murray. Bob, do we have your permission to film this interview, and will you sign a consent form?
Yes.
Okay. So, Bob, can you tell us how your family came to Mount Holly Springs?
Um, well, in 1995, a movie came out. Um, Probably everyone knows the movie Braveheart. It's a story of William Wallace, who was involved with trying to gain freedom for his country, Scotland. And I remember at the time I was so thrilled to see this movie. I mean, it was an inspiring movie, but there was a lot of creative license. There was a lot of things that I eventually found out were not true in the movie. But all the same, in talking to a friend about the movie, he asked me if I knew that the Murray name was very prominent in Scottish history. And I said, elaborate a little bit. He said that one of Charles Stuart, the King Charles Stuart of Scotland, one of his generals' name was George Murray. And once I'd learned that, I got a couple of the books about William Wallace and read them through. And I learned that, indeed, that's where I learned where there were so many differences from the movie and the real life of William Wallace, that I started to get interested in my own genealogy. That took me to doing my genealogy on Ancestry.com, and I traced my family. I learned that my family came to Mount Holly in 1865. They came here from Holyoke, Massachusetts. Before that, it was my great-great-grandfather. No, it was my great-great-great-grandfather who had come from Scotland to Canada. And then he brought the family from Canada into the United States. And my great-great-grandfather, which I have this photo here, the old couple sitting in the center there was my great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother, and they're the ones that brought our family. As I understood it, they were sponsored to come and work for the mill, what everyone in Holly knows as the upper mill, the Eaton-Dykeman plant. And this was I found out that they came here in 1865, just after the Civil War. Most of my family, most of the people in this photo, of course they're dead now, but some of them worked for the mill, some of them went into other avenues of life. The young fellow right here sitting is my grandfather, who grew up. He eventually lived on Hill Street all of his life. He grew up in Mount Holly and lived and died there. So once I'd found how my family got here to Mount Holly, that got me interested in my genealogy, my history.
Could you tell us how old you were approximately when you got interested?
Well, like I said, the movie came out in 1995. That's 20 years ago. Okay. You have to edit that out. Are you going to get to the point about, are you going to bring up how I got into the photos right out of this?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I should have just let you keep talking.
Well, I didn't know if you were going to ask me that.
Yeah, that would be next, yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have.
No, okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I guess because I didn't ask you how old you were, so we'll edit that out. I'm sorry, right. Blair. Yeah. So, Bob, if you could just tell us how old you are now to put that in perspective.
I'm 60, almost 63. I'm 62 now. Okay. Just retired. So, 60. I'm about 42 whenever I when I watched the movie and got interested in my genealogy and started on my path to where I'm at now.
Okay, so is that what got you started in collecting the Holly photographs?
No, I was sort of, let's say I was introduced to it. Now I have 3 sons, a wife and 3 sons, and most of my life, I was growing up in Holly, and then I got married and bought a house in Holly, raised my 3 kids. I wasn't really concerned about Holly history. One day, a friend of mine who, John Jacobs, he died about a year ago now, and he came to me one day and asked me if I had any photographs of Mount Holly, old photographs. He was especially looking for a photograph of the old Arnold's Food Market, which used to sit right in the middle of town, not where it was now. But he asked me if I had any photos, and I had a few. And by few, I mean literally 3. I think I was able to give him. And he showed me his collection, and I was just thrilled to see some of what things looked like 100 years ago, or maybe in the 1920s or 1930s. I saw those photographs, and I was intrigued, and I asked him if I could make copies of them. Of course, he obliged, and I made copies of the ones I had for him, and that got me started. And he had roughly 20 photographs. I started making copies of his. I would ask friends if they had photographs. Now this was roughly maybe 7 or 8 years ago that I got started looking at Holly things. And now Jake got me started, Jake. He's the one that got me started looking at these photographs. And I also got interested in Holly memorabilia. Things that you could touch. I mean, like old baseball uniform, or the Holly benches. We'll get to that later. But things that they were made 100 years ago, but they don't make them anymore. And I found out that most of this stuff had already been gathered up. People were collecting Holly things, 40, 50 years prior to me getting interested in it. So when I got interested in it, there was nothing else to collect. Maybe a piece would come up from time to time at a sale, but, and I knew there was stuff out there. I knew there were people that had stuff. So collecting the memorabilia, just wasn't able to do it. But what I was able to do was I found out that many of the photographs that Jake had, and I learned that the Historical Society here had many photographs, thousands of them. And when I came to visit in here and was able to purchase copies of the photographs that Jake did not have, starting to add to my collection. Some photographs from 1860, 1870, right on up into the 1950s, 1960s. So I was able to add to my collection by getting some from Jake, from the Historical Society. I visited the Shippensburg Historical Society, got some from there. I learned about the photo archives at the Pennsylvania Archives down in Harrisburg. I visited there a couple of times, and it was, each time I would find a few photographs by various search methods that were able to get photos that no one has ever seen before. I most recently, okay, I want to cut, I should, as an example, where's the photo at? Oh, okay. That's not it. Here it is.
You're great.
Okay. For instance, most recently, I got a photograph of the Mill Street Bridge. Now, folks may not recognize this bridge if you look at the bridge that we have out there today. This bridge that you're seeing right here, the only thing left of it is part of a bridge abutment that was on the far side of the creek bank, behind the Pennsylvania Dutch, well, we call it the Pennsylvania Dutch Candy Factory, or that complex there. But most recently I got this photograph, and there's a few houses on there that I recognize are still in existence today, but the large dark house here is no longer there. The bridge is in a different place. The banks of the creek are much higher now, and these are all things that have changed. This is from 1933, and I just think it's thrilling to see something from close to 80, 90 years ago of part of my town. So that's just one example. So through visiting these various places, historical societies and archives, and collecting photos such as this, there's something that I was able to make copies of. For instance, with the park benches, you can't make copies of some. A baseball uniform from the 1940s, there'd be very few of them, and you can't make a copy of it. But with photographs, I was able to make copies of things that were, 100, 110 years old, that are no longer there today.
So you talked about the Mount Holly Springs benches. Do you have a picture of them, and can you tell us what you know about the benches?
Yes. Well, there's many people who are from Mount Holly know about the old Holly Park upstream. I say upstream because there was two different parks. But the Holly Park upstream was a resort in the late 1800s. And at this time, this photo here is from about 1900, maybe shortly after 1903, 1904, when Pat Russ, his Italian name is Patrizio Russo, formed the Charlie to Holly, the Charlie line from Carlisle to Mount Holly. And at the same time, he formed this resort. This resort had, well, in this photo you can see that there's a restaurant. Now, if you were to go up to this area today, there's nothing even resembling a building, or you wouldn't know there was anything there. But 100 years ago, or 90 years ago, there was a park here, and it had a restaurant, a pavilion for eating. Of course, you can see the beautiful manicured walkways, and this is at a time before you had macadam. On back the way, you were able to, they had a Ferris wheel, a roller coaster, baseball field, a large pond, which was formed by the Holly Dam, where you could rent a boat, take a boat ride. And these things are all gone now. But one of the things you see in this photo are these, what we call the Holly benches. And I have roughly 7 or 8 photos of different angles all the way back through the park. This park is roughly a half-mile long. And if you count all the benches that were in this park, you'd probably find that there were roughly 60 to 70 of these park benches that at one time decorated the whole walkway back through the park. And I've been able to purchase benches for myself at sales. They're not cheap, but I have been able to keep track of who has these benches. Of the 70 or so that I think existed, I can only place 10 of them. There's 10 benches that I know have survived, like probably the scrap drives for the wars, and both world wars. And people just, they may have them in their backyard or in their basement, but
Can you talk
They
about the
don't know.
distinguishing feature that's on those benches so that?
Yes, they're a cast iron bench. It's a very simple bench, but they're cast iron. And the company that Pat Russ built the trolley line between Carlisle and Mount Holly was the Carlisle and Mount Holly Railway Company. So, but on the side, on the very side of each piece of cast iron, there is the C and MTH WR for railway, and that distinguishes. Now, I have been told that a friend of mine says he's seen this bench before. People have them that doesn't have that on, so I think this form of bench was mass produced. But the only thing that distinguishes it from as being a Mount Holly bench is there's that lettering, Mount Holly, the Carlisle and Mount Holly Railway Company. It's on each one of the castings.
And what price does that bench normally go for in today's?
I have heard. I know the one I have. I paid $240. That was at a sale. So I know today. I don't think you could find a bench that has the original wood on. I don't know. I haven't seen them all. And even a bench that you don't have any of the wood on, I know you could probably get. It would probably cost about $150 to $200 just for those two castings in order to make a bench. There's not a lot of them left.
And were they painted or is that natural wood?
I've never seen an original one. 1900. I wasn't alive then, so I don't. I can't say I've seen one with original wood on. The one I have sitting out in my backyard, it's not old wood. It's not brand new wood, but I have it painted. And I think all the ones that were in the park were probably painted as well. It's iron. Iron does rust, and if you have people sitting on benches that have splinters or rust on them, the clientele wouldn't like that, I'm sure. So they were kept up with paint.
Well, another point of interest is that you had a 1967 yearbook that you sold. Could you tell us about that?
Yes. John Jacobs, who got me started in collecting the photos, he was one of those who collected Holly memorabilia. And like I said, there were numerous people that I knew that were interested in, especially Holly, which, Mount Holly has a lot of history going back to the Civil War. Well, roughly a year ago, John died, and his wife asked me if I would help her to get rid of, well, not get rid of, but clean it up, help her sell all this much, some people would call it junk. She referred to it as all this stuff, that Jake had collected. One of the things that I sold for her, I sold her on eBay, was a 1967 yearbook of the Carlisle High School. I had numerous oracles, what they're called, yearbooks from Carlisle, and there was a person of interest in that book that made it rather appealing for collectors.
So can you talk about that person or?
Yeah, her name was Susan Blakely. I understand that her father was an officer or a teacher at the War College in Carlisle. So she was one of those post kids. I remember back in high school, that's what we called them, the post kids. She was a post kid from the barracks. I don't think she lived on the barracks. She lived in your house in Mount Holly. The oldest house in Mount Holly, is the oldest house in Holly or the oldest house north of the?
In the borough.
Oh, yeah, north in the borough. She lived in that house while she was going to school. And I didn't know that until I talked to you.
And what did that book sell for then?
I sold it on eBay for, I think it was $70. And normally a yearbook would bring $15, $20, but because she was in it, it sold for like $70 or $75.
Okay.
And,
So another interesting collectible in Mount Holly is the Reverend book.
yeah, I happen to have one copy. If any of you out there have a copy of this, might be worth a few dollars if you know the right person in Mount Holly that's looking for one. I know this book is one that I got this one from John Jacobs, who he paid $15 for it at an auction. I have seen this book go for over $300, or is it $200? Oh, either way, $200 for a book printed in 1944. That's very valuable. It deals with a lot of the history up until 1944. It chronicles a lot of the Holly residents who served in the war in the various branches, who possibly at the time of printing were still in the war. It also mentions a lot of the buildings. It mentions the houses of significance. A lot of the history that I've learned has come from this book. All right. It's called An Introduction to Mount Holly Springs, PA. As far as I know, it's the first, the first book that dealt with just Mount Holly Springs.
Okay, so now, Bob, can we focus on some of the photos that you brought and explain them as you show us?
I showed you this one. Now this is a photograph, and I take this to be right around the turn of the century. This is a photograph of the Holly Park Resort. If you drive up through Mount Holly, up through the Holly Gap, there's a bridge there. This is the bridge here, and there's a dam. Well, this dam's no longer there, but it used to be there. It backed the water up in order to divert the water down for the use at the mill, at the lower mill. In this picture, you can see the restaurant that I mentioned in the other photo, pavilion, small gazebo here, but nothing in this photo is there today. The bridge has been renewed twice since this photo was taken. The dam has been washed out from, I think, possibly Hurricane Agnes in the 1970s. All the buildings are gone. The only thing in this photo, if you knew where to look, this restaurant here, there's a foundation that is still up there today, and that's the only thing I have found that would tell you there was any kind of building there at all. That is from a postcard. There were quite a few postcards put out back, especially when the Holly Gap Resort was in full swing. It was an advertisement gimmick, or people would use postcards who visited here and sent them off to their relatives to show them where they're at. And there's probably a good 30 or 40 postcards that were put out of various, many of them black and white. Some of these, such as these, are in color. Two other photographs I have here are from that same road, Route 34, that goes through the Holly Gap. I'll show you that. This is right where the Route 34 crosses over the railroad tracks, and it's still like that today. Of course, today the road is macadam. The guardrails are actual guardrails. This is a wood fence. And you see that this time they used horse and buggy. this house is still here. The mill is up here. And this photo here is from about 1870, taken by John Choate, who was a photographer who, here's another photograph of him. He carried his photo equipment around with him around the country and took photographs. These are photos from Mount Holly, but he also took many photographs of Boiling Springs and other towns in the Cumberland Valley. And that was around 1870, 1880. And I believe this is a self-portrait of Mr. Choate. You see his wagons are sitting down here. Now, the fact that there's wagons there, and in this here's a wagon, I believe those were the same wagons. But I can't be sure, I wasn't there. And these were, like I said, these are from over 100 years ago, and that's what really fascinated me, was seeing some of these things that I grew up as a kid running around Mount Holly, and well, there was kids running around Mount Holly 100 years ago, and this is what they were running through.
Do you want to just briefly show us some of your collection and maybe explain the collection that you have at home?
Okay. Well, as I say, I have roughly seven booklets like this, and they're not all full of photographs, but this one here is it's almost entirely on the things you would have seen in the Holly Park around 1900. Now this photo here is from 1934. This is when they rebuilt the bridge. I have other photographs of the bridge being under construction, but this one is shows you the entrance to the Holly Resort, Holly Park and Resort. I'll just show you. Won't read everything. This was an event in 1904. It was the Harvest Home Picnic. I guess it was a big event back then. I've never heard of it being celebrated today, but it brought nearly 2,000 people to the Mount Holly Park to celebrate this Harvest Home Picnic. And you can see they brought them in by trolley. This again was the trolley that ran from Mount Holly to Carlisle and back. And these are all photographs of different buildings, different activities in the park. There was, like I said, there was feasting. There was a restaurant. Now this is a feast that was put on for somebody. And this photo was in 1917. So the park was still doing business in 1917 as the Holly Resort. More photos.
So does each volume of your books, is it a separate theme? Like,
Yeah, I have, like I said, this one I have devoted just to the Mount Holly Springs Park that, like I said, is no longer, you can't even tell it's there anymore. Other ones I have are different street scenes. If I could show you a few of those. I'm going to leaf through this. Like this is, I think I can do it easier this way. This shows of the Mill Street Bridge. There's the underpass in around 1940, full of water. That doesn't happen too often now to get downpour that would fill it up. This is the bridge on the other end of Mount Holly. There's another picture of the car got stranded in the water. This is where the car wash is. The Sheets is over here. There's a handy market here. So these are just different street scenes around Mount Holly. And I don't know why, I don't know why some people took them. This one I believe my father took on the roof of his house up on Hill Street, and it shows the old firehouse. Right here is the U.S. Hotel and the house beside beside the U.S. Hotel. Different views down Main Street. These are attributed to about 1880. The only building here that you can make out is the Lutheran Church, and I think the building right beside it is still there today. Different. This is the house of the one of the, what we'll call him, the founding father of Mount Holly, Charles Mullen. He's one of those who was involved with the mills, operation of the mills in Mount Holly. Two photographs from the square, one looking north, one looking south. Pam, your house is right up here, but you can't see it. The Holly Inn. Of course, there's only 2 stories. Today, there's only 2 stories, and this back part of it is no longer there. That's just an indication that there was a lot of people coming to Mount Holly to need a hotel with that many floors and that many rooms. There's the pictures of the bridge being constructed, after it was constructed. All right. And that's just road scenes. I have other ones. I have one that's full of different houses from antiquity, 1800 or 1890 up to 1930. Yeah.
Well, we're very fortunate that you have this collection and you have been showing some of your collection at the community events, and we very much appreciate that. And lastly, Bob, could you tell us what you intend to do with your collection?
I would like to. I want to make them available to everyone to view. I know if people seeing this realize that all of my photos are going to be available to view at the Holly Library, they may have some photos that they don't know what to do with. I have 3 boys, but none of those boys are interested in Holly history. If they would carry it on, I would be thrilled, but they're not interested. Maybe when they get to be my age, they might come around, get interested in their heritage. So I've instructed my wife and children that, once that day comes that I pass this scene, all this Holly stuff that I have should go to the libraries for others to enjoy. I don't have too much memorabilia, but one thing I do have is a lot of photographs, and I think they're valuable. I'd like everyone to have access to them.
Well, absolutely, Bob, and we in Mount Holly appreciate you being such an ambassador for us and for your fine collection. Thank you so much.
Okay.